folks. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Nimisha, and I'm an amateur chef and banker from India. I'm really passionate about cooking, and I want to explore a venture in the restaurant industry. I will be moving to New York in a few months to set up a restaurant business there. And I don't really know much about the market and need some overall guidance in terms of what would be a good fit for me, as well as how to start planning this transition. We're going to explore this journey on this podcast, and I will be assisted with CKitchen team, who are equipment suppliers with over 40 years of experience across the US. CKitchen works with all major brands and supplies food service equipment to hotels, restaurants, as well as institutions. Since the average salesperson at CKitchen has spent over 10 years building networks, they're some of the most knowledgeable people one can find in the restaurant business. And that's why Jen, a food equipment specialist from CKitchen team, is with us today, who will tell me where I need to start, where I need to go, and how to make a plan. Hey, Jen.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Hope you're awesome too.
Doing great, thank you.
Yeah, it's really great to have with you, sort of talk with you and be able to discuss my future plans with you as well. And I wanted to talk to you because I was really confused about what kind of business I want to start. And there's so many types, right? There's coffee shops, bakeries, diners, delis, bars, etc. So how do you suggest I go about choosing the right food service niche for me? And where do I really start looking?
So let's do it right. Before you make a plan, you need to decide how much money you have. Each area has its cost.
Got it. So can you go over the costs attached to some of the most popular formats in New York? I mean,
Right.
describe the costs of opening coffee houses, bakeries, quick service restaurants. In general, basically all popular food service businesses that do well in New York.
Okay, got it. So let's look at it format to format, I think would be a helpful way of approaching it. So for example, a coffee shop, you would need about approximately $200,000 to $375,000 for just setting the actual facility up. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the equipment, you'd probably be looking at about $75,000 worth.
Got it. So that's an additional $75K for equipment.
Correct. So $200,000 to $375,000 for that, and then $75,000 in addition. Now, if you were to consider a bakery, for example, a bakery is anywhere between $120,000 to $150,000, and if it's a small bakery, let's say about $20,000 worth of equipment.
Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you were to do a more simple pizzeria, you could potentially start with around $100,000 initial investment, but pizzerias do go up to even $2 million as far as the pizzeria setting it up itself, and then an additional $50,000 to $150,000 in equipment.
Mm-hmm. How about another store or a quick service restaurant?
Yeah, I was just thinking, okay, so a QSR, quick service, probably around $200,000 to $450,000 worth, and then an additional $100,000 worth of equipment, heavily refrigeration style equipment, display type. Delis and diners, which is like a step up, I would say, from that, very popular in New York, mm-hmm. Probably around $300,000 to $500,000, and around $120,000 to $200,000 worth in equipment.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Then if you were to establish, for example, like a fine dining restaurant, that's where you're going to see on the higher end side an initial investment for the restaurant itself of anywhere between $2 to $10 million. And then the equipment itself could go to around $500,000 worth in equipment.
Got it. For a fine dining restaurant.
Correct, yes.
Mm-hmm. What about a bar or a lounge? Is that within the same range as well?
No, that would be lower. And that's anywhere between, depending on the size, of course, about 175,000 to 850,000. And I would say a good starting point for equipment for a bar would be about $50,000.
Got it. That's interesting. I think you've covered seven or eight popular formats that I've also observed sort of popping up in the New York restaurant landscape. And this was very detailed, and this helped me sort of form and picture about how much I need to start up. And I think I have about close to 1.5 to $2 million to invest. And I think I should be able to seriously consider 4 or 5 of these formats that you talked about. Am I right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. If that's the range, then probably of the ones we discussed, about 4 to 5 would be within the realm of a realistic option for you.
Got it. That's heartening. That's good to know. And now that I know about the funding piece attached to all this, can you also, Jen, help me with some pros and cons of each format? I want to make sure I really choose something that's the right fit for me. So I just want to know what kind of pitfalls are attached to each category and what you've observed as trends over the years as well.
Okay, so let's say a bakery, right? Now, the bakery in and of itself does not require as much staff. It's more about displaying the cakes, providing what's already pre-made earlier on in the day to the customer. So in that sense, you're not going to have to spend as much money on an actual workforce by having a bakery. When compared to, for example, a fine dining restaurant or a more entry level or even middle range sit down restaurant, a bakery is going to run different. You're not going to need that many people. So there's that. Now, a pizzeria versus, let's say, a restaurant. The plus of doing pizzeria is that the actual menu, the items that you're going to need to make the pizza, to make that menu, is much less complicated than, for example, the menu in a sit-down restaurant where it could be much more varied. So your actual purchase of the produce, of the actual materials to make it, make the food menu for a pizzeria versus a sit-down restaurant are easier, less complicated. So those would be things I think you can consider when weighing one business format up against the other.
Got it. And I also have heard a lot about New York pizza being very famous.
It is delicious.
It is. I'm so looking forward to trying it out. Maybe you could show me around as well. That'd be awesome.
Oh yeah, I'd love that.
I also wanted to know, especially with New York pizza being so popular, do you think the market is saturated, or do you think there's room for more pizza joints or more pizzerias, especially in Manhattan and the popular part of town?
So the thing about pizza is I don't think it'll ever get old, and the population in New York doesn't seem to be diminishing anytime soon. And the other thing that's been happening in New York for quite some time now, almost 2 decades, is that the outer boroughs are increasing in population, increasing in their amenities, their tourism, in their hotels and their restaurants, especially. So you'll see a lot of that growth. So I definitely don't think that you're entering in a period of time where you wouldn't be successful. There's always room for new business in New York City. Now, speaking of New York City in and of itself, you know, the different neighborhoods come with different price tags, right?
Got it.
So the outer boroughs, something to keep in mind, the outer boroughs tend to be more economical than Manhattan in and of itself. The island of Manhattan tends to be more pricey. So that's something to think about when you're looking at your the space that you want to get, those kinds of costs. If you do decide that you must be in Manhattan, I would say to keep costs down, you might want to keep it in the lower part of Manhattan, Not so much the financial district per se, because that could be a little pricey, but the lower part of Manhattan and the more upper parts of Manhattan. Pretty much the middle of Manhattan is where you're going to see the higher cost to rent, to own space. So that's something to think about. And then, of course, the outer boroughs, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn. The parts of Brooklyn are as pricey as Manhattan, and the Bronx are different areas that you could consider. And I'd love to take you for a tour of eating pizza all over them. It's a lot of fun.
That'll be fun. Thanks so much for this info. I feel like I've gathered some sort of tips on how to choose a location.
Okay.
I also wanted to ask you, do the costs also vary? For example, if you rent out a storefront sit-in sort of space, or an indoor or an attic / basement sort of space, does that also affect your budget?
It does. It does, because location, right? That old saying, that's super important. But also foot traffic and appeal. So it's not so much of just is the space in an area where there's a lot of foot traffic. You'll obviously see more of a higher sticker price that goes with that. But also, is the space appealing? Is the space functional? Definitely indoors is going to be probably the most expensive, because it's sheltered, it's more comfortable. So there's that. Square feet play into a role. So perhaps you don't have so much of an indoor profile, but you have space on the outside. That might be a more economical approach. And in the warmer months, it's obviously a very nice experience too for your customers. And then, of course, there are restaurants that you do descend. And like you said, even climb up to access. They're on the second floor or they're on the basement floor. Those will probably be even more economical, less expensive options as well.
So you think having maybe a storefront at ground level and then having stairs that lead down to a basement, that's also an option in New York?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in outer borough areas like Brooklyn. They have these things called brownstone buildings, and that's actually pretty common. So you'll also see that mirrored in the commercial building side, where you walk in, but there is an under level and even a second level as well.
Got it. That's pretty conducive, because I know the real estate market in New York is a little difficult to negotiate. So I really appreciate all the tips you're giving me. And that also brings me to maybe some advice on how to start. Since you've been around for so long in the restaurant space, do you have any advice for me in terms of how to start planning, or any steps that I should follow while just starting out right now?
So I feel like you really are doing everything that you should do. And while you develop that business plan and you're going to be approaching the lenders about funding, you can take other steps to increase your chances of success, namely networking. Get involved in the local restaurant community in the neighborhood you're considering. Meet other small restaurant owners, ask them about any challenges that they came across and how much they spent to open up their establishment. And you'd be surprised, there's this, I guess, generalization about New Yorkers sort of not being the nicest, but I would highly disagree. And I think that as a community, they're definitely the type of people that you can go to and get really straight up answers from, that you will benefit, from hearing and using in your business plan.
Interesting. That's something to follow, right? I'm also looking forward to meeting other people from the industry, getting to know their stories, because I feel like networking adds a layer of realism to it all that I have been missing now that my plan is set into action. And I also, since New York is such a culturally diverse city, it's beautiful to watch so many different people from so many different backgrounds come together to form like a melting pot of a city in New York. I find that really admirable, because it feels like a capital of the world and not just the United States. So Do you have any advice for me in terms of how to be inclusive in my cuisine? And would you advise me to choose one cuisine over being like a general sort of menu?
Well, it will come down to math in part, right? So you're going to look at your menu, you're going to look at what the cost to execute that menu is going to be. You're going to estimate how many people you're going to be serving to sort of maximize that profit that you have in mind. So that's the business side of it. But as far as inclusivity and how to bring that into the business plan and just into the success of the business and your the restaurant's identity, right? I would say New York is cool like that. You really can get away with either focusing specifically on one type of cuisine or marrying things. It's very often that you'll see, for example, like a Japanese Latin fusion or Mexican halal or a restaurant that has touches of Indian spices and merges it with like a more American menu style. But at the same token, like you really could just say, I'm going to put out a menu that is representative of the dishes from India or different regions, even in India, and it'll still do well because, like you said, it is such a melting pot. And the palate of New Yorkers is pretty sophisticated. So you'll get all kinds of people interested in eating, whatever menu you ultimately decide to go with.
That's interesting. That's good to know that I can be creative and also create like a fusion sort of approach to food. That's great. And would you say New York has a high takeout or takeaway culture, or do people like to come in and dine?
Well, I mean, it's a busy city, so you're going to definitely see a lot of takeout. That's huge, especially been huge with the pandemic, especially because, of the restrictions. They have had many, more so than other parts of the country. But I feel like very soon, if not within the next immediate months, you're going to see that start to shift, where there's going to be a lot of outdoor eating again, and definitely a return big time to sitting inside. So, it has always been a takeout culture because of the speediness of life there. People got places to go. So yeah.
Interesting. That's interesting to look at. Each city has a different dynamic when it comes to the culture of the people and how they like to spend time with families and such. I also wanted to ask you, what are some things that you think are risks in this industry, or some risks that I am sort of sure to face in my journey?
Well, I wouldn't say risks per se. I mean, there are risks in any investment, right? But as long as you have a sound business plan, you should do well. Things to consider though, inspection. The things that the city of New York requires for a business to actually operate legally. Those are going to be things that you'll run up against, but definitely doable. It's just going to require some patience on your part and, just understanding that the process will get done. But it just needs to get done the way the city sort of wants it to be. And I would say those are the things to keep in mind.
Awesome. I'll make a note of that. I also look forward to connecting with any brands that are in your network that maybe you can link me with. Since
Sure.
I'm very new, and since it's just the first episode, I want to sort of use this podcast to network in the industry, bring on guests to talk with, and then maybe come back with you and share my learnings and maybe ask if I'm going in the right direction. So
Yeah.
how does that sound?
So off the top of my head, let me connect you with Turbo Chef. They're a good brand to begin your pizzeria journey with. Their representatives are great, and they would be happy to help you learn how to build a pizzeria and start you off on that path.
Interesting. I would be happy to get in touch with them. So you think we can meet in 2 weeks after we've sort of penned down a few questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Thanks so much for talking with me today, Jen. And I'll be seeing you very soon, hopefully.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure talking to you. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks, Jen.